if you're someone who's behaving in a way that's consistent with this model, consistent with that MP3, your MP5, excuse me, that we spoke about earlier, if you're doing all these things, you're doing it right, and you continually hit a wall, maybe it is okay to leave. And if you're not doing these things, maybe you better try these things before you say it's them, not me. And I think that to me is part of the value of this. It not only, as I said a moment ago, normalizes your behavior, it also gives you a template against which to say, am I doing these things?
This short episode was brought to you by the Kindrel Institute, so I'll keep the sponsorship message short. Also, you can find Kindrel and the Kindrel Institute and a plethora of brilliant thinkers and speakers who've been on the Innovation Show at kyndrylkindrel.com. This is the Hourglass Model suggested by Bruce and his co-authors in the book Serial Innovators. Welcome back, Bruce Vojak.
It's great to be back, Aidan.
It's great to have you back, man. We could have created several episodes out of the conversations we had off air.
I know.
So let's get stuck in here, and we're going to give it a short little episode here. I wanted to just offer people a shorter episode for those people with limited attention spans. Maybe you'll give a little introduction, Bruce, to what this we're seeing on the screen is.
Basically, this is presented in contrast to what a phase gate or stage gate model might be. Whereas a phase gate, stage gate is a very linear model, starting with this idea of having some concept or an insight. The insight's bought into, and then you develop it sequentially or stepwise. In the hourglass model, it's not prescriptive the way a stage gate or phase gate is, it's descriptive. It describes really the basic places where innovators reside as they move through this idea of creating some new business model or a new product or process. And it begins at the upper left. As we'd already talked a bit about, the people who are really very successful at innovating, the serial innovators who succeed well, they come motivated to solve customer problems. They're motivated to solve not only customer problems, but to advance the company, to make the company profitable, and to really help everybody in their environment. And so they're usually initially assigned some kind of a problem, but in the process of being assigned it, sometimes, not always, but often, they'll go back and they'll redefine the problem. So they deeply understand the problem and they may change the way it's framed. I had shared a bit about Tom Osborne with the Always Ultra product, and he was looking to make a feminine hygiene product. It was designed to function like a diaper. Turned out a lot of people in that organization came from that product area. So that was a mindset that was appropriate and it worked. And it was actually a very successful product at the time. But he began to look at it more carefully and more deeply, and he changed the definition of the problem. So the innovation in his case was really the redefining of the problem to say, no, it shouldn't necessarily look like a diaper. It should look like a garment. It should conform to the body and have all these other functions as a result. Be comfortable, if you will. But that's really this upper left phase where the innovator often, but not always, will really, in the process of coming into the project, have an assigned problem, but then really maybe redefine it in some way.
I thought about this as well, that there's a famous goalkeeper for Manchester United. His name was Peter Schmeichel. And I used to call our organization Schmeichel sometimes because nothing would get past it. And then I thought of, I can't remember who the quote is by, but it was like some quip by somebody who said, ideas, we don't ship ideas here. They're lucky if they escape. And that's the context for what I'm about to say. So sometimes I found when you get an idea that has least resistance, even if it's not the right problem to solve, you'll go with it. And actually, that's the origin of the Innovation Show. I worked for an organization. It was worse than Schmeichel. It was the best goalkeeper in the world. And the Innovation Show was one of those ideas that escaped from it. And I kept it going afterwards after that left that organization. But I just wondered what you found with that in your studies and research on people? Because I know you've done deep research on innovators, and sometimes it's not exactly the problem you want to solve, but it's a problem and it gives you a bit of progress.
I want to be really clear that the serial innovators were an interesting mix of being pragmatic and idealistic. And in this case, I'd say there is a certain level of pragmatism. I'd have to be, I'd have to really think to give you a couple of crisp, clear stories on it. But it's not like they all had to change and redefine the problem. And that's why I want to step lightly on that upper left circle, because they really would look to change it if it really solved customer problems better.
Not everybody has the luxury of that, of find the right problem. And it links to something we're going to talk in the next episode about this navigating the corporate politics, that sometimes they have to have a really good relationship with the customer in order to solve the right problem, and actually to get people who are bored of their jobs engaged to be working on these things in their spare time as well. But we'll talk about that in the next episode.
I'll quickly follow on that. When you think about this whole area of design thinking and empathy of customers, the innovators, and this is a little bit, it's a step or half a step away, but I think it's a good place to mention this at least, that the serial innovators were doing things like being empathic and really doing, I'll say, aspects of design thinking before a lot of these things were ever really even concepts. And I know I've alluded to this in the past, but this is a good example. They don't do things just for the sake of saying, I have to really redefine the problem. They say what's necessary to be successful in the organization. And as you said, there can be times where you go with what you've got, and other times where you say, no, this other concept is so important to pursue that if we don't do it, the competition might do it. So we have to pursue these things. And so they apply these things really flexibly.
Yeah, and we'll cover that in depth because that very
Yeah.
much comes to the fore in the next episode
Yeah.
on navigating
And it
the
will.
politics of breakthrough
Yeah.
innovation.
Yeah. So then moving from defining the problem, they move to the upper right, where this is where you deeply understand the problem. I always like to qualify this and say it's not an academic study, but it is a very deep dive. I'd say this upper right in particular, I'm I find is very appealing because it's counter to the idea that we're all well, it's counter to the idea that we just have to let loose. We have to be free thinkers. And the pattern that we saw wasn't just being crazy. And again, this view that we just have to have beanbag chairs and foosball tables and we can be innovators. No, it's this deep understanding. And it's a beautiful thing to look at because these are people who really understand the problem at hand. They understand the customer need deeply. They deeply understand the technology, not only the customer, but the market, the financial aspects, the manufacturing. They understand what's acceptable in the organization at different levels. And it's through that deep understanding that they begin to collect enough dots that they can begin to connect them. And that's when they begin to see, okay, there's a pattern here. I think I see something worth trying. And they drop down into that middle section. And that middle section is the cusp between what we might call the fuzzy front end and the actual stage gate itself in a linear model. And that center section is where they try things. They maybe do some small sample studies. They'll go talk in more specifics with customers. If it's a B2B sale, they'll go to purchasing agents and influencers in the customer organization, maybe with prototypes or other types of examples. But they really begin to try things and iterate and learn from that. And then they drop down to the lower section. That's much more the implement, lower left, lower right. The idea there is much more of not letting go entirely, but influencing the marketplace itself. And really, this model, if you will, is more of a state diagram. If we look at it in terms of using computer language, you have to pretty much touch on all of these 5 states in the process, but there's really no order that they have to appear in. And these arrows suggest where we more often saw a flow. So we might flow from upper left to upper right, but then we might flow from upper right back to upper left. Oh, we've learned all this. Maybe we've got the wrong problem. And then sometimes they'll drop down to the middle. Sometimes they'll be in the middle and they'll be learning things and say, we're trying things and this isn't even the right problem to go back to the upper left. So those arrows are meant to suggest these are ways we might see the flow. And so it again, it describes the innovators that are most successful and it suggests that if you're doing this and you recognize this, you're not as crazy as you might think you are. And I think that's an important statement to make sometimes too, because I don't want to say they were all plagued with self-doubt. Later, I hope to share a story of someone who began to really understand that she really was doing what was right, but it took a while to really accept that.
One of the things that dawned on me, again, looking at this diagram in the greater context of the book, and particularly in the next episode about the politics, is it also probably depends on the maturity of your organization, the skill set, the capability, the
Yeah.
understanding of the organization
Mm.
in a innovation cycle, and also where the organization is on its own S curve. Where is it on its own maturity, and has it got other people in R&D, other people in innovation, and also leadership, a leadership team nearing retirement who doesn't want to take on a big change is going to be more resistant of this kind of back and forth, etc. And I wondered sometimes about that. Is that why you could jump stages here and not even know that you are jumping stages and just be lucky because the organization you're in?
Yeah, I've got to say that there are some organizations, and maybe this is because I'm an engineer, I'll say this. The ones that rely, and we'll get to this in the next session more, but the ones that rely on data and facts, it's a little bit, I think, anecdotally, it's a little bit easier to navigate those. The ones that, even if they say they value data and facts, but actually it's not a virtue to believe in that, there, it's tougher because then it can be a more decisions can be based more on whims. And I've seen that, I've experienced it. And yeah, there's only so much any individual can truly do. I don't want to say that if you dropped any of these people into any organization, they'd be successful. But what it does tell me, at least, is that if you're someone who's behaving in a way that's consistent with this model, consistent with that MP3 or MP5, excuse me, that we spoke about earlier, if you're doing all these things, you're doing it right, and you continually hit a wall, maybe it is okay to leave. And if you're not doing these things, maybe you better try these things before you say it's them, not me. And I think that that to me is part of the value of this. It not only, as I said a moment ago, normalizes your behavior, it also gives you a template against which to say, am I doing these things?
A funny little thing for you last thing. When I was looking at this diagram, I kind of thought it looked like a human body. And when the product launches, I'm not going to say where it goes.
It's a birthing process.
Oh, even better. Well, that's more
Okay.
positive than I thought, man. When I
Yeah,
looked,
I didn't realize until after I said and you laughed. I thought, oh man, sorry.
brilliant. All right, Bruce, let's leave it there. And for those people who have just joined us for this little nugget, this little short episode, thank you for joining us. And Bruce Vojak, author of Serial Innovators, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I gotta love it.
This short episode was brought to you by the Kindle Institute, so I'll keep the sponsorship message short. Also, you can find Kindle and the Kindle Institute and a plethora of brilliant thinkers and speakers who've been on the Innovation Show at kyndryl kindle.com.